Hello, everyone. I'm James Devine. Welcome to Life's Journeys. In this episode, I have an interview from January 2024 where I spoke with New Zealand psychologist Professor Matamua on a most intriguing phenomenon, the near-death experience. And without any more delay, here's episode 7. Well, welcome, everybody, to Life's Journeys. It's my pleasure today to welcome on Natasha Tassell-Matamua on this conversation we're having on near-death experiences. Natasha is a professor at Massey University, New Zealand in the School of Psychology. She has a PhD in psychology. She's also a doctoral supervisor for students researching near-death experiences. She has expertise in kaupapa Maori psychology, cognitive sciences, and psychology of religion. And this year, 2024, Natasha is on leave to research people having exceptional experiences near death. So welcome, Natasha, to Life's Journeys.
Hi, James. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to have. Jumping right into some more of my questions here, Natasha, can you please explain for the audience your near-death experience that you had and how has it changed your life?
Sure. Um, well, I had what I didn't know at the time was a near-death experience, but later came to recognize it as one when I was in my late teens. And I'd moved out of home and we call it in New Zealand flatting, but it's essentially sharing a house with other people, usually around a similar age. But I was what we call flatting and going to university. And one day I just felt really unwell. And I'm not a person that does sickness that well. Usually when I'm sick, I don't lie down. And but this particular day, I just felt so unwell. I lay down, and I don't really know what happened, other than I lost. Well, I say I lost consciousness, but perhaps I found consciousness. I, something happened, and I just felt that my mind, sort of consciousness left my body, and I was traveling through a tunnel at really high speeds. And I must admit that at the time I did feel a little bit anxious because the speed at which I felt I was traveling was so fast, faster than I'd ever sort of traveled in a car or a sort of plane before. It was really amazing. So I felt a little bit anxious, but I was traveling through this what appeared to be a tunnel toward a light, and in the light there was a silhouette of a being, and I, for whatever reason, I'm not sure, just communicated to this light being telepathically that I wasn't ready yet. And when I communicated that, I was propelled back through the tunnel at a similar speed and back into my body. And that's when I woke up and was just covered in sweat and had a high fever and just wasn't really sure what had happened to me at that point, because I'd never heard of a near-death experience before. And I think I mentioned to you in our last conversation, James, the only thing I could really think it might have been, I sort of thought, oh my gosh, what happened? Was that like an alien encounter or something? Because I'd just never heard of these experiences. So it was something I kept to myself, because when you're in your late teens at university, you don't really disclose these sorts of experiences. So I kept it to myself, and it was only maybe a year later where I read a book, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, and in there's a description of near-death experiences, and I thought, maybe that's the thing I had. So that's the experience. In terms of transformation, I think on reflection, I mean, that was over 20, well, actually 26 years ago, 26 years ago. I think it's shaped my life, but I couldn't, 20 years ago, I couldn't tell you that. I couldn't claim that. But now on reflection, I can look back and think, yeah, it's definitely shaped my life, shaped my career and what I've researched and studied in academia. And yeah, there are lots of other little things that on reflection I can see it's been really transformative for me.
Yeah. Quite amazing. And just you mentioned you telepathically communicated with a being, and then that communication was about whether or not you return to Earth,
Y-
to your body.
Well, yeah, I just remember, and I don't know, I don't I don't know now. I can't articulate why I communicated to the being, I'm not ready yet, because I don't recall being asked a question.
Oh,
But in the moment, it felt like I understood what was happening, um, and that's why I communicated that. And to me, yeah, if I think about it, it was almost, I guess, like a choice, and me saying, well, look, I'm not ready. I need to return. Um, but I couldn't logically explain why.
right.
I just, yeah, it's just an
Mm.
interesting sort of, yeah, interesting sort of experience to have an understanding of what's going on, but then come back and not really understand. Yeah,
Right.
it's quite hard to articulate.
Oh, absolutely. I can imagine. I can imagine. Now I must share with the audience. My son had a near-death experience 2 years ago to the day almost now.
Mm.
And he explains something similar to what you're saying too, that he communicated with beings, and then there was the conversation. He shared with me that, whether or not he will return to his body. And so there's, correlation, there's a,
Mm.
connection there, that, that does happen, and he did return.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
in your experience with people who have had near-death experiences, um, is there a recurring message that they're having?
Yes. So I guess to contextualize for the audience, James, I've been researching near-death experiences for, well, I guess since 2009, as a research sort of exercise, and during that time, I've spoken to hundreds of people who've in New Zealand in particular, who have had near-death experiences, as well as overseas. And there do seem to be some recurring themes, not only in the actual experiences, but also in, like you mentioned, the messaging, and also, I guess, what they feel they come out of the experience with. Um, so I'm not sure which end to start off. Maybe what people come out with. And I think some of the strong themes appear to be that people feel that they have a purpose in life. Not everyone can articulate what that purpose is immediately or even years after, but they do say they feel their near-death experience, um, either overtly through their communication with beings, if that happened, overtly told them their purpose, or they just come back feeling that there is a purpose that they have, and that's why they're here, which I think is really cool, actually, really fascinating. Another really strong theme, or two themes really, is people tend to lose a fear of death after having a near-death experience. And that seems to be, when I've asked people about it, seems to be related to the idea that they feel that death isn't a finality. no longer feel that that's the case, and that they believe and understand that their consciousness somehow exists beyond their physical body. So I think that's really fascinating, that this no longer fearing death is an overwhelming thing that people, almost everyone actually, will say this is an outcome of the near-death experience. And the other overwhelming, I guess, theme is, or implication, is this idea of greater love, connection, tolerance of others, and care for others, care for the earth, care for nature, which is fascinating.
That is so fascinating and so well described. I'm getting a little bit choked up, to be perfectly honest, which my audience understands. I do. um, I think of the three, I'll just zero in on just briefly on the fear of death. I think that's really interesting. It reminds me of some reading I've done about the immortal philosophy. I believe I'll live forever. I think it's a healthy way to think. That's my opinion, and that's really fascinating too. That message comes through for near-death experience people. Do experts know these experiences are real? I mean, and if these experiences aren't physical, what part of the person is having the near-death experience?
That is such a good question. Which part of the person? I don't know, to be honest, James. In terms of the reality of the experience, though, I think I should say, at least for the audience, that I think the term real is really loaded.
Right.
Because what is real is, my belief, is really subjective. I think we, at least in the Western world, we have this privileging of science, and therefore, because of that privileging, we're always looking for a material, as in physical, tangible understanding of, well, of everything pretty much. But there are so many things that science cannot explain, or at least cannot explain yet. Maybe there are tangible physical answers for everything, but I personally don't believe that. So I think in terms of the reality of the experience, there is no physical scientific studies that have sort of, I guess, verified or indicated that a near-death experience occurs as a consequence of a particular brain sort of function, as an example. So in terms of them being real, there's nothing physical, tangible that we can point to and say, well, that caused it. So, or that didn't occur, so it can't be real, sort of thing. But for me, having spoken to so many people who have had near-death experiences, and of course, I guess my beliefs are coloured by my own experience. But certainly, when you sit down and you speak to someone who has had a near-death experience, I come to understand very quickly that something very real happened for them. And I think that's really important, that we recognise, as scholars, as medical professionals, we recognise that something important happened for the person, and the near-death experience is overwhelmingly transformative. And I think I mentioned in our last conversation, we have yet to find, so for the audience, my background is of course psychology. We've yet to find a psychological therapy that is as effective, in the short and the long term, as a near-death experience. So something happened. They are amazingly transformative, and to me, that is more important now than understanding, or verifying their reality in terms of Western science. So that may not be a satisfactory answer for many people,
Uh-huh.
and it's a tricky question that comes up a lot actually,
Yeah,
in my
exactly.
talks. How do you know they're real? Um,
Well, the ones that the ones I've viewed and listened to and that have had near-death experiences, I guess the only evidence I'm seeing, and I'm a believer that they are occurring, of course, and with my son's experience, absolutely
mm,
affirmed it. Of the others that I've watched on, the I guess the evidence would be that they were completely comatose, completely out of cognition during surgery procedure, correct? And yet when they've come back to the body, then they are explaining what was said in the operating room. Sort of that sort of evidence has come
mm.
through with some of these examples. Would you
Yes, yeah.
agree? Mm,
Yes, I agree. I know there is still debate about, well, we don't, in scholarship anyway, there's still debate about, well, we don't exactly know when the near-death experience occurred, and maybe what people are recalling is maybe they were still, alive and aware. And so there's lots of debate around those particular examples, but I think there are many that are quite compelling. And I think last time we talked about the example of Pam Reynolds, the lady that had that quite substantial brain surgery, where can't remember the term, but essentially they cooled her
mm,
body down so much, and there was she was clinically dead, and she was able to recall in great detail
mm,
many of the things that occurred throughout her surgery. And there are plenty of other examples as well, recent as well as going back to the example of Pam Reynolds. So to me, they're very compelling. But they're still not taken as verified evidence,
right.
because
Yeah,
because of these unknowns. Like, well,
sure.
when did that memory occur? And maybe it's confounded
Mm,
by other things. But yeah, to me, they're too compelling to continue to ignore.
yeah,
Um,
true.
yeah, yeah.
Quite amazing. I guess finally on that one question, is the patient coming back from basically you know essentially being dead. For example, my son, who he floated in the water and
Mm,
engulfed tons of water and was floating, according to the bystanders, for about 10 minutes or more,
mm,
and and needed to be resuscitated. CPR was performed and breaths were given. I mean, so he wasn't breathing and didn't have a heartbeat. To
mm.
come back and not have any brain damage and to for perfectly function is truly a miracle. Um,
Yeah.
in that case with my son, you were quoted in the paper, and like I said, 2 years ago, and in the you were quoted as saying 20% of those who have died and then being resuscitated had near-death experience. Do you still believe that figure is accurate now?
Yes. Yeah, I do. I do. And I think we talked previously about some of the I guess the nuances of research, which um, aren't always spoken about. But I'll, I do believe 20% is accurate, although some people say, well, no, it can't be that high, and some people say, well, actually, I think it's actually higher. And part of the reason for saying, well, it could be higher is because NDEs, we believe, and by we I mean researchers in the area, believe that they're likely underreported. So not everyone who has an NDE will report it, and that might be for reasons related to, for example, in my case, I didn't tell anyone for 10 years because A, I didn't know what had happened, and B, I didn't want to be thought of as, a little bit crazy for for having something that seemed to deviate from what we consider to be normal everyday reality. So for that reason, they're probably underreported. Um, the other reason why, so that's why some people say it could be higher. The reason why some people say actually it's lower is there is still debate in academia and the field of near-death studies regarding, well, how do we define a near-death experience? Do we restrict it to just people who have verifiably been clinically dead? No heartbeat, no brainstem activity, no respiration. The trouble with that is that it's really, really challenging to record people in those states unless they are in hospital. Excuse me. So, because of these debates regarding how do we define a near-death experience, can we include people like me, for example, who something happened, but I don't really know if I die. If I lost any my heartbeat, I don't know because no one else was there. So there's all these sort of debates that fly around. But in terms of the 20%, yes, I do believe that that figure is correct, probably even higher.
It's a miracle, if you want to use that word, that people, are returning from these experiences in good health.
Mm.
They have flatlined and then they're coming back, no significant brain damage as I can see, and go on living normal lives. Why do you think, Natasha, that near-death experiences occur?
Um, I think outside of the physical trauma that that leads to the death or the illness, I think I'm interpreting your question as meaning why on a perhaps a deeper personal spiritual level, and I think they occur because they, and again this is opinion. I've nothing to back this up other than my experience of interviewing people and hearing what they say, and I guess my reaction to that. But I think they occur spiritually because they provide the individual with something that they need at that time as part of their growth or development on a spiritual level. And, near-death experiences, even though there are these themes in the actual experience themselves, so, by themes I mean a lot of people will say they saw a light, or they went through a tunnel, or they encountered beings, or they met deceased loved ones, they saw their body from a disembodied, their physical body from a disembodied perspective. So there are these common themes, but there's no single near-death experience that I've come across that has ever been exactly the same as any other. So they seem to be very individualized, very specific to the person having the experience. And as I mentioned earlier, people come back feeling this sense of meaning and purpose, or that they have a purpose. And I think that's really telling in terms of what the experience can give and what it does for a person. So I think they happen for that reason, to perhaps provide direction, a pathway, a purpose, meaning for the person on a spiritual level.
Yeah. And I guess we, until we really know more definitively how many people are having them, we won't really get to the bottom of that question, the why question
No,
that I love to
yeah.
ask. It's a tough question. Thank you for that. And just finally, what are the implications for society now that we realize that near-death experiences, they're a real phenomenon? What are the
Mm.
implications for society, do you believe?
Oh, I think there are many. I think there are many. I think just from a scholarly perspective, in terms of understanding the human experience better. I think there's so much that near-death experiences can provide us in terms of understandings about the nature of consciousness, um, because they challenge, the very fact that they happen to people who appear to be dead, and these people come back and say, "Oh no, I was very much aware." The fact that that happens, I think, is should be making us question how it can happen when all of our established models, in psychology in particular, tell us. I when I was doing my studies, I learned that our consciousness is a function of brain function. When you have a functioning brain, you're conscious, and when you don't have a functioning brain, you're not conscious. And yet near-death experiences challenge that fundamental learning that we have in our discipline of psychology. So I think as a starting point, they really they are an exception to a rule, and if they're an exception to the rule, then the rule can no longer apply. So, and the rule I'm talking about is the rule that the brain manufactures consciousness. I think we really need to perhaps begin to relook at that and look at near-death experiences in light of, well, what are they telling us about the nature of consciousness? So there's that from a sort of scholarly research perspective. But I think from the perspective of, what can we as humanity, as society learn? Near-death experiences, people who have them come back and talk about this idea that, well, one, we shouldn't fear death, and two, that the most important thing in the universe is love. And they then begin to express that through a sense of greater tolerance of others and greater connection to others and to the earth and to nature. So I think there's a lot to learn from the near-death experience in terms of our relationships to each other, but also our relationships to the world and other beings in the world, not just humans, but the earth itself. And our intimate connection to it, recognizing that we are part of the earth, not the rulers. We don't have dominion over it, we're part of it. So I think there are lessons for society, really beautiful lessons that we can take from near-death experiences if we choose to. I think we should choose to.
Well said, and I love that you're articulating that brilliantly about the implication for society about the body, the human, where their consciousness is not part of the brain, and the brain has been shut off like a television, and they're in consciousness still. So
yes.
To me, it's a spiritual experience. Natasha, thank you so very much for joining us, and it's been enlightening. And I know you're a busy person, and yeah, I'm grateful for you coming on today.
Oh, thanks, James. It's been lovely. As you know, near-death experiences are a real passion, and I'm always happy to chat more about them and hopefully provide a bit more understanding. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. Check back in to hear the follow-up interview with Natasha on her latest NDE research and what she discovered there. Please like and share this podcast episode to encourage more enlightening conversations. Until next time, take care.